Charlotte, North Carolina, on a sweltering August morning in 2025, was thick with summer heat and the distant hum of a small protest in the city center. James Turner maneuvered his weathered Ford F-150, its faded green paint catching glints of sunlight through the tree-lined streets of Myers Park. The radio crackled with a brief news report. Charlotte residents continue to clash over economic inequality, as affluent neighborhoods like Myers Park face criticism for their disconnect from working-class communities. James flicked the radio off, muttering under his breath, "Same old story." He had no time for the endless debates on social media or hashtags like #CharlotteDivided. He had a job to do. James, 34, was an electrician working for a small company on the south side of town. With short black hair, sharp brown eyes that seemed always on guard, and a lean, muscular frame from years of manual labor, he carried himself with quiet confidence. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, James had learned early on to value hard work and keep his head down. His toolbox rattled in the passenger seat as he pulled up to a sleek, modern house on Queens Road. It's white exterior and floor-to-ceiling windows screaming wealth. The call had come in that morning, a circuit breaker issue. Routine stuff. Inside the house, Eleanor Nora Hayes, 32, was pacing her living room, her laptop open on a glass coffee table cluttered with sketchpads and colored pencils. A freelance graphic designer, Nora had built a comfortable life in Myers Park, though she shunned the ostentatious displays of wealth common in her neighborhood. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her casual linen dress contrasted with the polished elegance of her surroundings. She glanced at the flickering chandelier above, its light stuttering like a dying heartbeat, and sighed. The electrician was late. When the doorbell rang, Nora opened it to find James, his navy work shirt slightly damp from the heat. "Morning." "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but polite. "Turner Electric. Hear about the circuit issue?" Nora nodded, stepping aside. "Thank God you're here. The lights have been acting possessed all morning." James gave a small smile, more out of courtesy than amusement, and followed her inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender and fresh paint, a stark contrast to the motor oil and dust of his usual work sites. As he set down his toolbox and began inspecting the breaker panel in the utility room, Nora lingered nearby, leaning against the doorway. "You're good at this, aren't you?" she said, her tone light but curious. James glanced up, surprised by the comment. "I've been doing it long enough," he replied, turning back to the panel. He wasn't used to clients making small talk. Most just wanted the job done, and him out the door. Nora didn't leave. Instead, she tilted her head, studying him as he worked. "You're kind of handsome, you know that?" The words hit like a jolt of electricity. James froze, his screwdriver hovering over a wire. He wasn't sure if she was joking or flirting or something else entirely. His first instinct was to laugh it off, but her expression was open, almost disarming, like she'd simply stated a fact. He cleared his throat, feeling heat creep up his neck. Thanks, I guess." Not exactly used to hearing that on the job. Nora laughed, a soft, genuine sound. "Sorry, didn't mean to throw you off. Just, you've got this focused. Look, it's nice." James didn't know how to respond. He was used to keeping things professional, drawing a clear line between himself and clients, especially ones like Nora, whose world of polished floors and abstract art felt a universe away from his own. He grew up in a cramped apartment in West Charlotte, where the hum of struggle was louder than any protest. The idea of someone like her noticing him, even for a moment, stirred a mix of curiosity and unease. As he worked, they fell into an unexpected rhythm of conversation. Nora asked about his job, and James, loosening up, shared a story about rewiring an old diner downtown, how the owner had paid him partly in peach cobbler. Nora laughed, then told him about her grandmother, an artist who taught her to see beauty in small things, like the way light hit a cracked sidewalk. For a moment, the gap between their worlds seemed to shrink. When the job was done, Nora handed him a glass of iced tea. "You're not just a guy who fixes lights, are you?" she said, her eyes searching his dot. James shifted, unsure if it was a compliment or a challenge. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "Call me Nora," she said, scribbling her number on a piece of paper and slipping it into his hand. "And maybe, if you're not too busy saving Charlotte's power grid, you could grab lunch sometime." He stared at the paper, his thumb brushing the ink. Lunch? With her? The idea felt like stepping onto foreign soil. He was a guy who ate sandwiches in his truck between jobs, not someone who dined with women from Myers Park. A part of him wanted to say yes. Her openness, her lack of pretense, tugged at something he hadn't felt in years. But another part, the one that remembered every sidelong glance and whispered judgment from people who saw him as just a worker, held him back. "I don't know," he said, slipping the paper into his pocket. "I'm not sure that's my kind of thing." Nora didn't push. "Fair enough, but the offer's open." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made him question why he was hesitating. As James drove away, the paper in his pocket felt heavier than it should. He passed a group of protesters near Uptown, their signs demanding fair wages and affordable housing. The radio, now back on, buzzed with a heated debate about Charlotte's growing wealth gap. James thought about Nora's house, her easy confidence, and the way she'd looked at him, not with pity or superiority, but with something real. It unsettled him. Back at his apartment that evening, a modest one-bedroom with peeling paint and a noisy radiator, James sat on his couch, the paper with Nora's number on the coffee table. He thought about his mother, who'd worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his trade school. She'd always told him, "Don't let anyone make you feel small, James, but don't chase what's not yours." Was Nora's world hers, or could it, somehow, be his too? He picked up the paper, his fingers tracing the digits. He wasn't sure what he felt: attraction, curiosity, or just the pull of something different. But there was a spark, faint but undeniable, and it scared him as much as it intrigued him. He'd spent his life building walls, keeping things simple. Nora, with her candid words and unguarded smile, had cracked that wall in a single morning. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm: cars, honking, distant sirens, the faint pulse of a protest still lingering. Charlotte in 2025 was a city on edge, caught between growth and division, wealth and struggle. James didn't know where he fit in that picture, but for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then typed a message. Asterisk. "Hey, this is James. Lunch sounds good. Let me know when." Asterisk. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, his heart pounding like it did when he was 16, asking a girl to a school dance. The reply came almost instantly. Asterisk, tomorrow, noon. River's Edge Cafe. See you there, James. Asterisk. Leaned back, exhaling. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't. But as the city's lights flickered outside his window, James felt something shift inside him, a quiet resolve to see where this spark might lead. The River's Edge Cafe sat tucked along the banks of the Little Sugar Creek, its wooden patio strung with fairy lights that glowed faintly under the midday sun. James Turner arrived 10 minutes early, his palms sweaty despite the air-conditioned chill of his truck. He'd swapped his work shirt for a clean navy button-down, but he still felt out of place among the cafe's clientele, professionals in tailored blazers and young influencers snapping photos of their avocado toast. He glanced at his phone, rereading Nora's text. Asterisk, River's Edge, noon. Can't wait. Asterisk, his thumb hovered over the screen, half tempted to cancel. What was he doing here? Nora Hayes arrived right on time, her auburn hair catching the light as she stepped onto the patio. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans, but her easy confidence made her stand out. Spotting James, she waved, her smile as disarming as it had been the day before. "You made it," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I was half expecting you to bail." James chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Thought about it. Not exactly my scene." He gestured vaguely at the cafe, where a group at the next table was debating the best filter for their Instagram posts. "Then why'd you come?" Nora asked, leaning forward, her green eyes curious but not pressing. He hesitated, searching for an answer that didn't sound foolish. "You seemed real. That's rare." It was the truth, or at least part of it. The other part, the part that kept him up last night, was the way her laugh had lingered in his mind. Like a song he couldn't shake. Their conversation flowed easier than James expected. Over iced coffee and sandwiches, Nora shared stories of her childhood, raised by a grandmother who'd painted murals on the walls of their old house in Noda. "She taught me to see the world like a canvas," Nora said, her fingers tracing invisible lines on the table. "Every crack, every shadow, it's all part of the picture." James found himself opening up, too. He told her about his mother, who'd worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his trade school, and how he'd learned to strip wires at 10, sitting on the floor of his uncle's garage. "She always said, 'Work hard, keep quiet, and don't expect handouts,'" he said, his voice softening. "Guess that's why I'm not much for this." He nodded toward the cafe's polished crowd. Nora tilted her head. "This? You mean people who pay $10 for a latte? Trust me, I'm not one of them. I just like the view here." She gestured at the creek, its water glinting under the sun. For a moment, they were just two people talking. The gap between their worlds, his of calloused hands and hers of curated aesthetics, feeling less like a chasm. But as they laughed over a story about Nora's failed attempt to fix her own sink, a phone camera flashed nearby. James caught it out of the corner of his eye. A young woman at another table, her phone angled toward them, her fingers already tapping the screen. He stiffened, his smile fading. What was that about? Nora followed his gaze, her expression darkening. Probably nothing. People around here are obsessed with their feeds. But it wasn't nothing. By the next morning, a photo of them at the cafe had surfaced on a local Charlotte gossip account on X, captioned, **, Myers Park Princess and her blue-collar fling. What's the story here?" The post had already racked up hundreds of likes and comments, ranging from snarky, "Bet she's slumming it for clout," to outright cruel, "He's just after her money." Classic. James saw it at a coffee shop near his next job, scrolling through his phone while waiting for his order. The barista, a guy he'd known since high school, leaned over the counter. "Yo, James, you're trending, man. Didn't know you were into rich girls." "It's not like that," James muttered, his jaw tightening. But the words stung. He'd heard them before, not about Nora, but about guys like him. The old digger, opportunist, out of his league. Growing up in West Charlotte, he'd endured enough sideways glances to know how people saw him. The kid from the wrong side of town, never quite belonging. Now, with Nora, those old wounds reopened. He drove to his next job, a flickering porch light at a townhouse, but his mind wasn't on the work. Was Nora playing some kind of game? Was he her project, a way to rebel against her polished world? The thought gnawed at him, and by the time he met Nora again that evening, at her suggestion, this time at a quieter diner on the edge of town, he couldn't keep it in. "You see that post?" he asked, his voice low as they sat in a vinyl booth, the hum of a jukebox in the background. Nora nodded, her face tight. "Yeah, it's disgusting. I'm sorry, James." "Sorry doesn't fix it," he said, sharper than he meant. "People are calling me a hustler, saying I'm chasing your money. You know what that feels like? Nora's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something fiercer resolve. I know exactly what it feels like. My family's been trying to shove me into their mold my whole life. Marry the right guy, live in the right house, smile for the right cameras. You think I don't get judged? James leaned back, caught off guard. He'd expected her to brush it off, to stay above the fray like someone from her world might. But her voice carried the weight of someone who'd fought her own battles. So why me? He asked, quieter now. Why risk this mess? Nora looked at him, her gaze steady. Because you're not like them. You're not pretending to be something you're not. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending too. Her words hit him hard, stirring that same spark from their first meeting. But the doubt lingered. I'm not your project, Nora, he said, his voice firm. I'm not here to prove some point about crossing lines or whatever people think this is. I don't need you to prove anything, she replied, her tone matching his. I just want you to be here, with me. The sincerity in her voice disarmed him, but the weight of the ex-post and its comments still pressed down. As they left the diner, James noticed a few stares from other patrons, their whispers barely concealed. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to confront them. Instead, he walked Nora to her car, the night air heavy with the scent of rain. You okay? She asked, pausing by her sedan. He nodded, but it was a lie. Just not used to being noticed. She reached out, her hand brushing his arm. You don't have to do this alone, you know. We're in this together. James wanted to believe her. But as he drove home, the city's lights blurring through his windshield, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a world that didn't want him. His phone buzzed with a notification, a new comment on the X post. #Charlotte divided. In action, some people should stay in their lane. The next day, at a hardware store picking up supplies, James overheard two customers talking about the city's growing divide. Myers Park folks act like they're saving the world, but they don't know what it's like to scrape by. One said. James gripped his card, the words echoing the comments online. He thought of Nora, her warmth, her defiance. Was she different, or was he just fooling himself? That evening, he called her. I'm not backing out, he said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. But I need to know this is real, not just some story for people to tear apart. It's real, Nora said, her voice soft but firm. And I'll prove it to you, not them. As he hung up, James felt a shift. Not trust, not yet, but a willingness to try. The city outside his window buzzed with its usual chaos. The hashtag Charlotte divided trending again on X as debates about class and privilege flared. But for the first time, James didn't feel like he was just a bystander. He was part of something worth fighting for. The late August heat clung to Charlotte like a second skin, but James Turner barely noticed it as he knelt in the attic of a sprawling estate in Eastover, rewiring an outdated electrical panel. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his hand steady as he stripped wires with practiced precision. The job was a big one, a contract from the wealthy Thompson family, the kind of gig that could keep his small business afloat for months. But his mind wasn't on the wires. It was on Nora Hayes, the ex-post that had branded him a gold digger, and the nagging doubt that he was wading into waters too deep for a guy like him. It had been a week since their diner conversation, and James and Nora had settled into a cautious rhythm texting daily, meeting for coffee when his schedule allowed. Each encounter chipped away at his skepticism, her warmth and sharp wit pulling him closer despite the whispers online. But the whispers were growing louder. The Charlotte divided hashtag had exploded on X, fueled by a local blog post titled, Class Clash or Cash Grab. That painted James as a hustler, and Nora as a naive heiress slumming it for clout. The post had gone viral, racking up thousands of shares and comments, some calling for boycotts of James's services. He'd already lost 2 regular clients, their excuses vague but pointed as he finished the attic job. The homeowner, Mrs. Thompson, greeted him at the door. "Excellent work, James," she said, her smile polite but distant. "We'll be in touch for the next phase." He nodded, but her tone didn't sit right, like she was already reconsidering. Driving away, he checked his phone and saw a new notification, a direct message from an anonymous account. Asterisk. "Stay away from her, opportunist. You're embarrassing yourself." His grip tightened on the steering wheel, the words cutting deeper. Then he wanted to admit. That evening, James met Nora at a community park in Noda, where murals splashed color across brick walls and food trucks drew a diverse crowd. She was waiting near a taco stand, her sketchpad tucked under her arm, her auburn hair glowing under the streetlights. "You look like you've had a day," she said, handing him a bottle of water. He took it, forcing a half smile. "Yeah. Well, you say he's got a lot to say about us." Nora's face fell. "You saw the blog post? Hard to miss when it's everywhere," he said, his voice tighter than he meant. "Lost 2 clients this week. People think I'm using you to climb some ladder I don't even want." Nora's eyes narrowed, not at him but at the injustice of it all. "It's garbage, James. They don't know us." "They don't know you." Before he could respond, a man approached, tall, polished, with a tailor blazer and a smirk that screamed old money. Nathan Blake, Nora's ex-boyfriend, was the kind of guy who belonged in Myers Park boardrooms, not this eclectic park. James recognized him from photos Nora had shown him, though the real-life version carried an air of smug entitlement. "Nora," Nathan said, his voice smooth as silk. "Didn't expect to see you here." And he glanced at James, his eyes flicking over his worn jeans and work boots. "The electrician, right?" James's jaw clenched, but he extended a hand. "James Turner." Nathan shook it briefly, his grip limp. "Right. The guy from the X-Posts. Quite the celebrity now, huh?" Nora stepped closer to James, her voice sharp. "What do you want, Nathan?" "Just catching up," Nathan said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Heard you're slumming it these days, Nora. A phase, I assume?" He turned to James. "No offense, man, but you're out of your depth. This world?" He gestured vaguely at Nora. "It's not for guys like you." The words hit like a punch, but James didn't flinch. He'd heard worse growing-up teachers who assumed he'd never amount to much. Neighbors who sneered when his mom worked late. He stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "I don't need your world, Blake. I've got my own." Nathan's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Sure. Keep telling yourself that." He walked away, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Nora touched James's arm. "I'm sorry. He's an ass." "He's not wrong about one thing," James said, his eyes on the ground. "People like him. They're your world. I'm just the guy who fixes their lights." "That's not true," Nora said fiercely. "My world is what I make it, and I want you in it." Her words stirred something in him, hope, maybe, or defiance. But the doubt lingered, fed by the blog post and the anonymous messages. Later that night, alone in his apartment, James scrolled through X, the hashtag Charlotte Divided hashtag, now a battleground. FOR debates about class, race, and privilege. A local conservative outlet had doubled down, calling Nora a performative progressive and James a leech. The comments were brutal. Asterisk. He's just a prop for her woke agenda. Asterisk. Why? Can't people stay with their own kind? Asterisk. The next day, James arrived at the Thompson estate to finalize the wiring job. Nathan was there, chatting with Mrs. Thompson like they were old friends. James overheard him mention concerns about hiring unreliable contractors. Mrs. Thompson's smile was tight as she thanked James and promised to review the contract. He knew what that meant. Another job slipping away. But James wasn't the kid who backed down anymore. He returned to the attic, double-checked every connection, and left the panel cleaner and more efficient than it had ever been. When Mrs. Thompson inspected it, her eyes widened. "This is impeccable," she said, almost surprised. "You've outdone yourself, Mr. Turner." Nathan, standing nearby, said nothing, but his silence was louder than any insult. James met his gaze, holding it for a moment before walking out. It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was something proof he could stand his ground. That evening, Nora called him. "I'm writing something," she said, her voice urgent. "For the Charlotte Observer, about us, about this nonsense. I'm tired of letting these people define us." James hesitated. "You sure? That'll just stir things up more." "Good," she said. "Let it. I'm not hiding, James, are you?" Her question hung in the air. He thought about the lost clients, Nathan's smirk, the anonymous messages. Then he thought about Nora's laugh, her sketchpad, the way she looked at him like he was more than his calloused hands. "No," he said finally. "I'm not hiding." The next morning, Nora's op-ed hit the Observer's website. *Love. In a divided city, why we're more than your hashtags. It was raw, unflinching, calling out the blog's lies and the city's obsession with class. "James Turner isn't my project or my rebellion," she wrote. "He's my partner. And we're building something real, whether you understand it or not." The piece spread quickly, sparking heated debates on X. Some praised her courage. Others doubled down, calling it virtue signaling. James read it at a gas station, his phone screen smudged from his work gloves. He felt exposed, vulnerable, but also seen in a way he hadn't expected. Nora wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him. For them, but the backlash wasn't over. At a job site the next day, a client canceled outright, citing reputation concerns. James overheard a coworker muttering about that electrician from the news. The city's divide, amplified by X and fueled by 2025's polarized climate, where woke and anti-woke battles raged daily, was closing in. James drove home, the radio buzzing with talk of a new conservative push against cultural elites. He turned it off, but the noise lingered in his head. That night, he met Nora at her house. She opened the door, her eyes tired but defiant. "You read it?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, stepping inside. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said. "I'm not letting them tear us down." He looked at her, the weight of the week pressing on him. "Nora, I don't belong in your world. Not with all this." He gestured vaguely, meaning the blogs, the comments, the city itself. She stepped closer, her voice firm. "Then we'll make our own world, James. Together." Her words were a lifeline, but the doubt still gnawed at him. As he left, the city's skyline loomed in the distance, a glittering reminder of the divide they were trying to bridge. On X, a new post was gaining traction. *Charlotte divided. Can love really conquer? Class. James didn't read the comments. He didn't need to. He knew the fight was just beginning. The autumn air in Charlotte carried a crisp edge, a welcome relief from the summer's relentless heat. James Turner stood outside a rundown storefront on North Davison Street, its faded sign barely legible under layers of grime. The building was small, wedged between a craft brewery and a vintage record shop, but it had potential a blank canvas, as Nora would say. James adjusted his toolbox, his breath visible in the early October light. This was it, the space where he and Nora Hayes planned to launch Turner and Hayes Studio, a bold idea born from late-night talks and a shared defiance against the city's judgment. The past weeks had been a whirlwind. Nora's op-ed in the Charlotte Observer had sparked both support and backlash, with X posts under hashtag Charlotte divided, ranging from heartfelt endorsements to vicious attacks. James had lost another client, a corporate office that cited image concerns, and the anonymous messages kept coming. Asterisk, know your place, Turner. But Nora's words, "We'll make our own world," had lit a fire in him. He was tired of running from the noise. This studio, a blend of his electrical expertise and her graphic design talent, was their answer, a space to serve the community, not just the elite. Inside, Nora was already at work, her sketchpad open on a folding table littered with coffee cups and blueprints. Her auburn hair was tied back, and her sleeves were rolled up, a smudge of dust on her cheek. "You're late," she teased, glancing up with a smile. "Had to pick up some wiring," James said, setting his toolbox down. "This place is a mess. You sure we can pull this off?" Nora stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "We're not just pulling it off. We're building something real. Look." She pointed to a sketch on the wall, a logo with clean lines and bold colors. The words Turner and Hayes Studio woven together like a circuit. "This is us. Equal parts you, equal parts me." James studied the design, his chest tightening. Equal. That was the word that scared him most, not because he doubted Nora, but because the world outside kept reminding him they weren't. Still, he nodded. "Looks good. Let's get to work." The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and early mornings. James rewired the storefront's faulty electrical system, his hands steady despite the exhaustion. Nora painted walls, designed flyers, and built a website that showcased their vision: affordable electrical services paired with community art workshops. They planned free repair clinics for low-income residents and art classes for kids, a way to give back to the Charlotte that had raised them both, albeit in different worlds. But the road wasn't smooth. Funding was their first hurdle. James's savings were modest, enough for tools and rent, but not much else. Nora chipped in from her freelance earnings, but her family, still stinging from her public defense of James, cut off their financial support. "They want me back in their bubble," she told James one night, her voice bitter as they sorted through invoices. "Marry some suit like Nathan, play the part. I'm done with that." James admired her resolve, but it didn't ease the strain. A local bank rejected their small business loan, citing market instability in Charlotte's 2025 economy, where startups struggled against corporate giants. They scraped by with crowdfunding, but even that came with scrutiny. A viral X post from a local influencer questioned their motives. Asterisk, charity, or PR stunt. Hashtag Charlotte divided. The comments were relentless, some digging up an old video of James repairing a community center in West Charlotte, now twisted to claim he was faking his goodwill. The video hit James hard. He watched it on his phone during a break, the grainy footage showing him laughing with kids as he fixed a flickering light. "They're saying I did that for clout," he told Nora, his voice low, like I'm some kind of con artist. Nora slammed her laptop shut. "They're wrong. You did that because it's who you are. Don't let them rewrite your story." Her words steadied him, but the doubt lingered. At night, alone in his apartment, James scrolled through X, the platform a battleground of opinions. Posts about small businesses failing under corporate pressure mirrored their own struggles, while others debated labor rights with hashtags like hashtag support local clashing against hashtag big biz wins. Charlotte in 2025 was a city of dreamers and cynics, and James felt caught in the middle. One evening, as they hung flyers around Noda, a group of teenagers stopped them. "You're the electric guy, right?" one asked, pointing at James. "Saw you on X. That studio sounds dope." James blinked, surprised. Thanks. You should come by when we open." "Bad," the kid said, grinning. My mom needs her. Porch light fixed. You do that free thing? Yeah, James said, glancing at Nora, who was beaming. We got you. The moment was small but electric, a reminder of why they were doing this. They worked late that night, Nora designing posters, while James installed outlets. At one point, she handed him a marker. Sign the wall, she said. Our first mark. He hesitated, then wrote James Turner, 2025 next to her Nora Hayes. The act felt permanent, like a vow, but the outside world wasn't done with them. A potential client, a local restaurant, backed out after a rival electrician spread rumors about James's reliability. Nora's family escalated their pressure, her mother leaving voicemails about wasting her potential. And then there was the video reshared with a new caption, asterisk, Turner's just using charity to climb the social ladder. Asterisk James snapped one night, tossing his phone across the studio. This is bullshit, he said, his voice raw. I'm trying to do something good, and they keep twisting it. Nora crossed the room, her eyes fierce. Then we keep going. We don't need their approval. We need us to believe in this. He looked at her, the anger ebbing. You really think we can make this work? With all this against us? I know we can, she said, her hand finding his. Because we're not just building a business, we're building a life. Her words grounded him, and they threw themselves back into the work. They reached out to local organizations, securing a partnership with a community center to host their first repair clinic. Nora's website went live, clean and professional, drawing inquiries despite the online hate. Slowly, support trickled in a retired teacher who wanted art classes for her grandkids, a mechanic who offered to spread the word. Each small win felt like a brick in their foundation. One night, as they painted the studio's front wall a deep blue, Nora paused, her brush dripping. You ever think about giving up? She asked. James didn't look up. Every day. Then I think about you, and this place, and those kids who stopped us. Makes it harder to quit. She smiled, a quiet pride in her eyes. Good, because I'm not letting you. The next morning, they hung the Turner and Hayes studio sign above the door. It wasn't perfect. The paint was uneven, the budget tight, but it was theirs. As they stepped back to admire it, a passerby snapped a photo, and James braced for another X post. But this time, the caption was different. Asterisk, new spot in Noda. Support local, y'all. Hashtag Charlotte United. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The studio's soft opening was set for the following week, with a free repair clinic and art workshop. James and Nora spent every spare moment preparing, their days a blur of paint cans, wiring, and coffee runs. But the pressure was mounting. Nora's family sent a final ultimatum: return to their world or lose their support for good. James faced another canceled job, this one from a client who admitted, I can't afford the drama. And on XA, new wave of posts questioned their funding, some hinting at shady motives. Yet, as they stood in the studio one night, surrounded by half-finished walls and scattered tools, James felt something shift. He looked at Nora, her face lit by the glow of a single bulb he'd wired himself. We're really doing this, aren't we? He said, almost to himself. We are, she replied, her voice steady. And we're doing it our way. Outside, Charlotte buzzed with its usual chaos protests in Uptown, debates on X about labor rights and economic inequality. But inside the studio, James and Nora were carving out their own space, a fragile but growing defiance against a city that wanted to keep them apart. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, James didn't feel like he was fighting alone. The storm hit Charlotte with a vengeance in early November 2025, a howling beast born from the warming Atlantic, its winds tearing through the city like a warning. Trees bowed, Power lines snapped, and entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness. James Turner barely slept, his phone buzzing with emergency calls from clients desperate to restore power. Turner and Hayes' studio had been open for just 2 weeks, its paint still fresh, and its community workshops barely off the ground, but the storm didn't care. It was a test, and James felt it in his bones. He worked around the clock, his truck rattling through rain-slicked streets to fix generators, rewire flooded panels, and rig temporary lighting for community centers. His hands, calloused and steady, moved with mechanical precision, but his mind was a storm of its own. The city's chaos mirrored the turmoil he and Nora Hayes had faced since their story went public. The hashtag Charlotte Divided hashtag still trended on X, with their studio now a lightning rod for both praise and scorn. A new post had surfaced that morning, shared thousands of times. Asterisk. Turner's cashing in on the storm. Charity? Nah, just branding. Hashtag opportunist. It included a photo of James hauling cables at a shelter, his face grim under the rain. The comments were vicious. Asterisk. He's milking this for clout. Asterisk. Nora's boy toy is at it again. Asterisk. James ignored the post as he worked. But the words burned. He was out here risking his neck to keep the lights on, not for likes or headlines. At a low-income apartment complex in West Charlotte, he restored power to 12 units. The residents' grateful nods a quiet counterpoint to the online hate. But the exhaustion was catching up. His eyes stung, his shoulders ached, and the weight of the city's judgment pressed harder with each job. Nora wasn't faring much better. Her family had delivered their final blow, cutting off all financial support after she refused to abandon the studio or James. "You're throwing your life away," her mother had said in a voicemail, her voice cold. "For what? A man who can't even keep up?" Nora deleted it, but the words lingered. She threw herself into the studio, organizing art supplies for kids displaced by the storm and coordinating with James to keep their repair clinics running. But the pressure was relentless, and the X-Post didn't help. One blogger called her a privileged do-gooder, accusing her of using the studio to cosplay as a savior. The crisis peaked on a rain-soaked Wednesday night. James was at a community center, wiring emergency lights, when his phone buzzed with a text from Nora. "Meet me at the studio. Urgent." He drove through sheets of rain, the city a blur of flickering streetlights and flooded intersections. When he arrived, Nora was pacing the studio's half-lit interior, her face pale but resolute. "What's wrong?" he asked, shaking water from his jacket. She handed him her phone, open to a new X thread. A local watchdog account had posted a scathing expose, asterisk, "Turner and Hayes, charity or scam, shady funding and storm profiteering." It twisted their crowdfunding efforts into a conspiracy, claiming James was overcharging for repairs and Nora was funneling money for personal gain. The thread had exploded, with thousands of retweets and comments calling for investigations. Worse, a major client, a nonprofit that had promised a long-term contract, had just canceled, citing public concerns. James's stomach dropped. "This is a lie," he said, his voice low but shaking. "We're barely breaking even." "I know," Nora said, her eyes blazing. "But they don't care about the truth. They just want a villain." He sank into a chair, the weight of it all crashing down. The storm outside roared, rain hammering the studio's windows like a warning. He thought of his mother, working double shifts to give him a shot at something better. He thought of the kids at the community center, their faces lit by the lights he'd fixed. And he thought of Nora, standing beside him through every hit. "Maybe we should stop," he said, the words tasting bitter. "Not us, not the studio, just this fight. It's tearing you down, Nora. I'm tearing you down." Her face hardened. "Don't you dare," she said, stepping closer. "You think I'm here because it's easy? I'm here because it's you." Because this, she gestured at the studio, its walls lined with her sketches and his tools, is worth it. James looked away, his throat tight. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. You're the reason I'm fighting for something real, she said, her voice breaking. Don't give up on me now. Before he could respond, a call came in an emergency at a shelter where the generator had failed. James grabbed his toolbox, the instinct to help overriding his doubt. We'll talk later, he said. Heading into the storm. The next day, Nora took matters into her own hands. She'd been invited to a local radio show, Charlotte Voices, to discuss the studio's community work. James was against it, fearing more backlash, but Nora was done hiding. As he worked another job, wiring a school's backup system, he tuned in on his truck's radio. Nora's voice came through, clear and unflinching. I'm tired of the lies, she said. Turner and Hayes Studio isn't about fame or money. It's about giving back free repairs for families who can't afford them. Art classes for kids who need a spark. James Turner isn't my project or my fling. He's my partner, and he's out there right now in this storm, keeping this city lit. If you want to judge us, fine. But I'm not choosing between love and reputation. I'm choosing truth. The host tried to steer her to safer topics, but Nora doubled down. Charlotte's divided because we let it be. We can build something better together. That's what our studio is about. James gripped the steering wheel, his chest tight. Her words weren't just a defense, they were a call to arms. The radio buzzed with callers, some angry, some inspired. One woman, a single mother, said, James fixed my apartment's lights for free last week. He's the real deal. Another caller scoffed. Sounds like a PR stunt. But the tide was shifting. On X, #Charlotte United began trending alongside #Charlotte Divided, with posts praising the studio's work. Asterisk, saw their repair clinic. They're legit. #support local. Asterisk, the storm raged on, but so did James and Nora. He worked through the night, restoring power to a senior center, his hands moving despite the exhaustion. Nora rallied volunteers at the studio, turning it into a hub for storm relief, distributing blankets, charging phones, and teaching kids to draw as a distraction from the chaos. But the crisis wasn't over. The nonprofit's cancellation left their budget in tatters, and Nora's family made it clear. No more safety net. James felt the walls closing in, the city's judgment and the storm's fury merging into one relentless force. That night, at a community event to distribute supplies, Nora took the stage unannounced. The crowd, locals, volunteers, even a few skeptics fell silent as she spoke. James Turner is out there right now, fixing what's broken in this city. Not for fame, not for money for us, for Charlotte. If you think that's a scam, come talk to the families he's helped. Come see what we're building. James, standing at the back, felt the crowd's eyes on him. Some nodded, others whispered, but for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. Nora's voice, fierce and unwavering, was a beacon in the storm. When she stepped down, he pulled her aside, the rain still dripping from his hood. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice rough. I wanted to, she replied, her eyes steady. We're in this together, James. Storm or no storm. He nodded, the weight of her words settling in. Outside, the wind howled, and Charlotte's lights flickered. But inside, something stronger was taking root, a resolve to keep fighting, not just for themselves, but for the city they called home. The late November sun cast a soft glow over Charlotte, its streets quieter now, the scars of the storm fading into memory. Turner and Hayes Studio stood proudly on North Davidson Street, its deep blue exterior and hand-painted sign a beacon Noda's eclectic heart. Inside, the air buzzed with live children's laughter echoed from an art workshop in one corner, while James Turner showed a group of adults how to safely replace a light switch in another. The studio had become more than a business. It was a hub, a place where Charlotte's divided worlds began to blur. James, his navy work shirt dusted with sawdust, paused to watch a young girl proudly show Nora her watercolor painting, a bright, chaotic swirl of colors. Nora Hayes knelt beside her, auburn hair tucked behind her ear, her smile as warm as the sunlight streaming through the windows. "That's incredible, Mia," she said, taping the painting to the wall. "You're an artist already." James caught Nora's eye, and she winked, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come. The storm had tested them, as had the city's relentless judgment, but they'd held fast. The hashtag Charlotte United hashtag had overtaken hashtag Charlotte Divided on X, driven by posts from locals who'd benefited from their free repair clinics and art classes. One viral post a photo of James fixing a lamp for an elderly woman, captioned asterisk. "This is what community looks like." Asterisk had shifted the narrative. The studio wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But the journey hadn't been easy. The nonprofit contract they'd lost during the storm was a blow, but new opportunities had emerged. A community organization, impressed by their work, offered James a contract to rewire a string of low-income housing units. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady enough to keep the studio's lights on. Nora's freelance design work picked up too. Her bold aesthetic drawing clients who valued her authenticity over her family's wealth. They bought a small house together on the edge of Noda, a fixer-upper with creaky floors and a sagging porch. It wasn't Myers Park, and it wasn't West Charlotte. It was theirs, a space carved out of compromise and shared dreams. At night, they'd sit on the porch, the city's hum a distant backdrop, and talk about the future. "No more running," James had said one evening, his hand finding hers. "This is home." The studio's official opening was a celebration of that home. On a crisp Saturday, the street outside buzzed with locals, families, artists, workers. Even a few skeptics drawn by curiosity. Tables lined the sidewalk, offering free coffee and Nora's hand-designed flyers. Kids painted murals on a community canvas, while James demonstrated basic electrical repairs, his voice steady as he explained circuit breakers to an attentive crowd. The air smelled of fresh paint and roasted chestnuts from a nearby food truck. A fitting blend of Charlotte's grit and charm dot as James handed out tools to a group of teens. A familiar face approached Mrs. Thompson, the homeowner who'd nearly dropped his contract after Nathan Blake's interference. She looked out of place in her tailored coat, her expression hesitant. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice softer than before. "I owe you an apology." James paused, surprised. "Ma'am?" "I listened to the wrong people," she said, glancing away. "That blog, those posts, I was wrong about you. Your work at my house was exceptional, and what you're doing here." She gestured at the studio, the crowd, the laughter. "It's remarkable. I'd like to hire you again, if you'll have me." James studied her, the weight of her words settling in. Months ago, he'd have brushed it off, too guarded to care. But now, standing in the studio he'd built with Nora, he felt something shift. Forgiveness, maybe, or just the quiet strength of knowing his worth. "Appreciate that," he said, extending a hand. "Let's talk." Mrs. Thompson's handshake was firm, a small victory in a city still wrestling with its divides. On X, a post from a local journalist captured the moment. Asterisk Turner and Hayes Studio opens today, proving community beats division. Hashtag Charlotte United. It spread quickly, liked and shared by people who'd once doubted them. As the event wound down, James and Nora stood on the studio steps, watching the crowd thin. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We did it," Nora said, her voice soft but proud. "Not just survive, build something." James nodded, his arm brushing hers. "Yeah, something real." They walked too, Their house under a sky scattered with stars, the city's pulse steady around them. Charlotte in 2025 was changing. Small businesses like theirs were gaining traction, fueled by a growing wave of locals tired of corporate dominance. X posts has celebrated micro-entrepreneurs, with hashtags support local trending alongside stories of community resilience. James and Nora weren't just part of that wave. They were helping shape it. Inside their home, the living room was a work in progress. Half-painted walls, a couch covered in drop cloths. Nora flopped onto it, pulling James down beside her. "What's next?" she asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Keep building," he said, his voice steady. "More clinics, more classes. Maybe a second location someday." She laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "Big dreams, Turner. Learn from the best," he said, kissing her forehead. Outside, Charlotte hummed with its usual rhythm: traffic, laughter, the faint echo of a protest in uptown. The city wasn't healed, not entirely. The divides of class and privilege lingered, debated on X and in coffee shops. But James and Nora had carved out a space where those divides didn't define them. They built a life not just for themselves, but for a community ready to believe in something better. As they sat together, the weight of the past month's storms, slander, and all felt lighter. "We didn't just survive," Nora said, echoing his earlier words. "We built something." James smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Yeah, and we're just getting started." As winter settled over Charlotte, Turner and Hayes Studio stood as a testament to what James Turner and Nora Hayes had built against the odds. The storms, both literal and figurative, had tested them, from the venom of social media to the weight of a divided city. Yet, in the quiet moments, like when a child's painting brightened the studio's walls or a neighbor thanked James for a free repair, they found purpose. Their story wasn't just about love. It was about defiance, about proving that bridges could be built where walls once stood. Charlotte in 2025, with its buzzing X debates and simmering tensions, was far from perfect, but James and Nora had shown it could be better. One connection, one act of care at a time. Their journey reflected a universal truth: real change starts small, in the choices to stand together, to create rather than destroy. James, once guarded by years of doubt, had learned to trust not just Nora, but himself. Nora, freed from her family's expectations, had found her voice, not as a rebel, but as a builder. Together, they turned a rundown storefront into a beacon, a place where Charlotte's heart beat louder than its divides. We invite you to join their legacy. Follow Legacy Stories on X, where we share tales of resilience, love, and community stories like James and Nora's that remind us what's possible when we dare to build together. Share your own stories using #LegacyStories, and let's inspire a world that chooses connection over division. Visit our channel for more and become part of the story, because every legacy begins with a single step.